Mr. Yuan Peng, Vice President of the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations, joining us in the Beijing studio. Welcome, sir. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., we're joined by two gentlemen. One is Charles Freeman, who is the International Principal at Forbes-Tate, LLC. Welcome, sir. First time in our show. A big welcome to you. And meanwhile, joining us from Washington, D.C., Dr. Paal, who is Vice President for Studies at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. It's great to have you again, Mr. Paal. The three gentlemen with us to talk about this very important speech coming from the U.S. President once, only 1 year. So what are your assessments about the strength of America today when President Obama, Mr. Freeman, said, when there are international issues, big ones, they call us, not China, not Moscow either?
I think it's important for the president to reiterate, particularly for a Republican crowd, that the U.S. military strength is at the top of the agenda. When he says they call us and not Moscow or Beijing, I'm not sure who he's referring to. But in any case, the United States still is the preeminent power in the world, whether anybody likes that or not, and we still have an outsized role in global affairs. That's certainly true.
On the partisan issue, of course, President Obama, Mr. Paal, admitted that's one of his biggest regrets through 7 years of presidency already. But have the partisanship interfere much of Obama's international relation policies?
I think it has gotten in the way of international relations. I think Obama's going to be remembered as a highly partisan president, someone who did not work across the aisle effectively. He has the advantage of having the Republican opposition working very hard to compete to look even more partisan, but he's not going to get a good record in this area. And it has infected the international sphere as well. He's brought a very different agenda to handling important affairs in the Middle East. He used partisanship to delay the transaction of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and that has delayed it into a political year, making it somewhat more vulnerable than it needs to be politically.
On the other hand, what about his stance on China, for example? And also, how has his policy, or how will his policies, if there are any real policies coming from the Obama administration toward China, likely to be remembered, Mr. Freeman?
Well, I think one of the unique things about this presidency, and speaking as a former George W. Bush official, I have to confess my bias here, but most American presidents, really since President Nixon, have taken a direct personal role in China affairs. And President Obama seems to have been a lot more hands-off with respect to China, whether or not he's personally interested in it or not, and whether or not he recognizes the huge importance of the relationship. He hasn't taken a particularly personal role in driving China policy, and I think that's frankly hurt the direction of U.S.-China affairs. It's drifted a bit.
Mr. Yuan, of course, your turn to talk from China. Do you think his lack of personal approach toward China really has hurt the relation, as Mr. Freeman just mentioned? Could it be better?
Yes, it's the last State of the Union 3 times mentioned about China, and not that positive. The first part, he said that when it comes to international important issues, and everybody just don't call China or Beijing or Moscow, just call on the United States. I don't think it's true. For example, when talking about AIIB.
You sound like from another party, from another political party in Washington. But anyway, go ahead, sir.
Actually, for example, in the counterterrorism, because of America just leading from behind, so Moscow and Russia taking a lead for a while. And in terms of financial and world economic issues, I think European countries pour into Chinese AIIB. So it is Beijing and Moscow now play more important role than 7 years ago when Obama came into power than today's United States. That's the truth. As for the China policy, I think at the very beginning he wanted to have a very good, positive policy toward China. But in the past 7 years, we witnessed that we cannot see a very clear American-China policy comparison with the years before. I think his China policy is more reactive than objectively make. And also because of balance to China, they focus too much on its alliance relations, such as Japanese, Filipino. So the balance between China and its traditional allies, I think, he done a very poor job.
All right, interesting. Those points I'd like to throw to you, Mr. Paul. Really, it has been reactive coming from the Obama administration in terms of its China policy, and really it is all about alliances in China's neighborhood to rival the rise of China?
I think there's been a marked change both in the rhetoric and the direction of policy since the 2013 change of the National Security Advisors. When Tom Donilon was the National Security Advisor, he kept a very close watch on China policy and on what the president had to say publicly. Since then, the president's own instincts have come to the surface under National Security Advisor Susan Rice, who's a more combative and tough-talking sort of person. And I think the helm of the policy ship has been left without someone to steer it in the last couple of years.
Mr. Freeman, you and Mr. Paul have been longtime China observers. Has that policy from the very beginning of Obama administration, whatever you call it, and eventually it's called the rebalance in Asia, really bears certain kinds of fruits? Has it been translated into concrete actions? What are those concrete actions? How is this administration likely to hand down its legacy about that toward the next one?
Well, I think if you go back to the very beginning of the Obama presidency, there was a strong interest in developing almost a partnership relationship with China in global affairs. I think the Obama White House became frustrated by lack of progress in that relationship and with trying to find ways to work constructively with China on those global issues. So in a way, there's been a bit of a backlash since then. I don't know, and I don't know that the rebalance to Asia or the pivot to Asia, whatever you call it, was all about China. I think at its heart it was a recognition that Asia is probably the most important place to be globally. China is certainly a big factor in it. I think we've struggled a little bit, and the Obama presidency has struggled a little bit with defining what role the U.S. should play in Asia. In many ways, it's developed into, as Yuan Peng says, it's focused on alliances in ways that have actually been divisive in U.S.-China relations.
And what would that mean, really, Mr. Freeman, if we could go one step further? The alliances, once it's there, once it's being strengthened about certain purposes, it's going to be there for quite some time. So what does it mean for, let's just say, the next 4 or 5 years to come, when the Chinese president is also having his own second term? So what would that mean? Because we see these two presidents meeting one another on various occasions, bilateral, internationally, and they also decided on certain issues, for example, international security issues, climate change issues. They did work together, but will the momentum be able to be carried forward with issues like that?
Well, I'm actually personally very hopeful that whoever is the U.S. president next time around, and President Xi will recognize the importance of very strong and constructive U.S.-China ties. I think the danger right now in our relationship is more one of surprise and a mistake. You have a lot of American forward action, a lot of increasing Chinese action in the seas in China's neighborhood. There are certainly opportunities for error that I think could escalate into something more like conflict, but I think ultimately cooler heads will prevail, and both sides will recognize that it's in both countries' interests to preserve strong and constructive relationships.
Well, I guess that they've been talking about that for really quite some time. Will really the surprises and mistakes be avoided and cooler heads always prevail, as Mr. Freeman would like to wish Mr. Yuan Peng? What is your judgment?
For what?
For about this, about what's likely ahead with the current situation we've already got?
I think on the one hand, Obama makes some progress in U.S.-China relations, particularly speaking in international cooperation like climate change, like Iran nuclear talks, and also like jointly dealing with Afghanistan. But on the other hand, in the Asian Pacific, both in East China Sea and South China Sea, both sides, and in particular, Obama administration done a very bad job in Chinese perspective. So in the future, how to manage our sea disputes, in particular South China Sea disputes, how to manage the cyber security of the disputes, those two issues, I think should be built into next presidency mind, because this is two very sensitive issues.
Right.
And most importantly, as the number one and number two economy in the world, how those two giants working together to protect world economy in a very stable and prepared future. This is all the other countries are looking upon on U.S. and China cooperation.
Right.
We need to be responsible powers in
Well,
this
we're going to
regard.
talk about that in a while, but for now, let's go to some of the international relations and international issues. Mr. Paal, Mr. Obama seemed to claim credit about the Iran nuclear issue. He could probably do that. On the other hand, people also see a comparison about the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue. It has been quite a failure, at least in this presidency's notebook. So what do you make of that attempt? It seemed apparent choice that President Obama made about one to approach, the other to delay it or just put it forever or off. This specific political choice.
I don't agree with your characterization of the a policy approach to Korea. On Iran, like everything with Obama, it's always about the future. We'll see whether the Iran agreement works. We'll see whether climate change will be brought under control. We'll see whether Obamacare works. Those are all things for the future. It's always hope and change, promises. But on Korea, by my count, the Obama administration reached out to North Korea 5 times, and each time got its outstretched hand rejected by the North. And it started at the very beginning of the Obama administration and continued right up through 2012 with the February 29 agreement. And I just don't think there's anything to work with there that involves cooperative understanding between the two sides. Now, there are different opinions in America. There are people who say we haven't gone far enough to give assurances to North Korea. But I don't think in our experience with dealing with the North, there's anything you can give them that will make them say, that's enough, we can do a deal. It's a very difficult partner, as China is also discovering.
All right, Mr. Yuan, your brief response.
On North Korea issue, I think President Obama done a very poor job. The 4 times of a nuclear test, 3 times happened in Obama administration. And the reason for that is that Obama focused too much on its relations with Japan, on disputes between Japan and China, South China Sea, East China Sea, and less focus on the most sensitive issues, that North Korea nuclear issues. Many times China is a core on the 6-party talks, resumption of 6-party talks. This is the only platform for dealing with that sensitive issue. But each time, I think Obama administration just said, let's wait for North Korea has very serious response to delete its nuclear
preconditions.
Preconditions.
That's what we're talking about. Another point between China and the United States, of course, is the interesting issue about TPP. Today, Mr. Freeman, at the State of the Union address, Mr. Obama did call on the Congress to pass the specific bill so that TPP could become a reality. How big a reality will that be in the near future? What would that mean for U.S.-China relations at the moment China is now being included in the list?
Well, I mean, if TPP passes, and it's far from assured, the president listed a number of achievements that that he was proud of, including TPP. Notably, all of his achievements except TPP were fought very hard against by the Republican side. TPP is actually popular only with Republicans and violently, no, perhaps not violently, but is very disliked by his own side. My own sense is that TPP for China is an opportunity and less of a challenge. It is the TPP, as it's negotiated, is truly a 21st century agreement. It focuses on the reality of intra-Asia trade and intra-Pacific trade in ways that no other trade agreement has done to date. I think that's a blueprint for the Chinese trading economy in the future, and I think whether or not China is ultimately a member of TPP, TPP is a useful benchmark for China going forward and a useful way of looking at how China's own trading relationships will be governed in the future.
I see. It is not just U.S.-China relations, in fact, that has been mentioned in the State of Union. In fact, that's only a small portion of it, even though in this part of the world we are extremely interested in that small portion. It is also various kinds of international issues being discussed at the State of the Union. For example, the credit that President Obama claimed on the issue of Iran, nuclear issue, and also about Cuba as well. How much do you think these two legacies likely to be translated into real realities? As we all know, there's still political partisanship inside the United States. Mr. Paal, briefly.
Well, a lot of Republicans would say that Mr. Obama has an affinity for America's enemies, and therefore he's improved relations with Havana and Tehran. I do think that actually no Republican would be in a position, because of the way our electoral system works, to have normalized relations with Cuba. I wish we had done it earlier, and I wish we had done it more wholeheartedly. We ought to be investing in Cuba on a vast scale. It's our neighbor. It should be a friendly state. And so I think Obama did the right thing in that case. Iran, we don't know yet. There's still a lot to be done. It's one of these very conditional agreements. Hope it works. Can't be sure it will. And then elsewhere in the world, he's had limited effect on important matters. The one thing that really counts for China, and to go tally with Charles Freeman's most recent remarks, TPP is important because it's going to be a source of global growth.
Right.
And China should want to be part of that as Chinese own domestic economic growth declines.
And I would like to go to you as well, Mr. Yuan. Of course, you need to comment about the TPP as the other two American panelists already did, and also about the President Obama's remarks toward fighting against the terrorism, including the ISIL. How much do you think that will create the space for international community, China and the U.S. included, to work together, as there are still different interpretations about various issues related to that? Mr. Yuan, first of all, TPP and then fight against terrorism.
Yes, for TPP, I partially agree Chair's argument that both opportunity and challenge to China. But so far, it's more challenging than opportunity, because first of all, the TPP at the very beginning is a closed door to China. And secondly, as President Obama mentioned many times, that it's the United States, not China, who should set the rules, which means TPP viewed China as a potential competitor. So far, it's more challenging. And in the future, I think China is quite open. China open-minded in the future, because of China is an open economy. So as for the counterterrorism cooperation, I think we have very good cooperation on this regard during Bush administration. But so far, because of American just leading from behind, and it's not truly, focuses energy on counterterrorism. And secondly, I think Middle East now is a chaos. Russia, European states, even Saudi Arabia, they have a different coalition. So this time, I think it's the states who should take the real leading role to reorganize the real counterterrorism coalition. In this regard, I think China can be part of, the responsible stakeholder.
All right. My producer is telling me we're running out of time, but before we go, I would really like to have very short one sentence from every one of you as to how you are looking at the 1 year ahead, the year 2016, the last year for U.S. President Barack Obama, and the new year, of course, for anyone who's likely to win this presidential election. Mr. Paal.
Well, we have a very difficult year ahead. What we see today is not going to be what we see at the end of the year. The politics will change dramatically as we go through this electoral season.
Mr. Freeman.
I think Doug's right. I mean, we have a very difficult year, and I think China will be watching the U.S. political process with something approaching horror, because China's will come up. The rhetoric will be very, very nasty. But as Doug says, at the end of the day, I think it will come back more towards the center. And so all the fears that have been stoked in the meantime will be largely put to rest.
All right. And Mr. Yuan, one sentence.
In 2016, both sides were focused too much energy on domestic issues. China will be on 13th five-year plan, and American go to the election season. So we hope that focus on domestic issues can provide some base for international cooperation between these two countries.